Hi, I'm Daniel Isofano. Welcome to Plan Santa Barbara. We are in the process here in the city of Santa Barbara updating the city's general plan. And the general plan provides direction on a number of key topics such as housing, future growth, transportation, and key community services and facilities. And over the course of the last several months, we in the city have received a tremendous amount of feedback from Santa Barbarans talking about the future of their community. And on a great number of issues, Santa Barbarans see things eye to eye.
I think there was general acceptance that in order to do this, the type of development on transit corridors, that we need to have available open space amenities. Complete agreement on development standards for a sustainable and healthy community. Agreement on the needs of special populations. Two people were concerned that we need to be very careful about that and watch for the law of unintended consequences.
During the recent series of community workshops held back in April, the public confirmed three overarching objectives. First, any new growth occurring over the next 20 years needs to be managed carefully. Secondly, new growth must provide some degree of community benefit. And finally, all growth and redevelopment needs to be sustainable. Santa Barbara has already experienced a level of growth approved by the voters through Measure E. The increment of new growth for the next 20 years in the city will be relatively small, no more than 3 million additional square feet of commercial and office space, and possibly less. For residential development, the number of units may range from 2,000 to 7,500 units, but in no case would it exceed the capacity of existing zoning. Through a range of incentives, the city has the option to prioritize community benefit land uses such as affordable housing, city services, youth and child care facilities, cultural and arts programs, and small local businesses. In addition, all new development will adhere to the city's green and sustainable standards. In time, as existing parcels undergo redevelopment and transition to new land uses and buildings, any new development will also adhere to the city's green and sustainable land use and building standards. But what are these sustainable standards? What does sustainable really mean in the context of a general plan? And what city policies and programs can help Santa Barbara manage its resources and continue to offer a high quality of life for present and future generations? This program will seek answers to those questions. During the next half hour, we'll outline the city's sustainability goals. We'll also show you examples of programs the city has already implemented to move us down the path toward full sustainability. We'll be talking with city residents, city staff, and other members of the community to look at how we are currently living within our resources. We'll examine the programs in housing, transportation, and energy. But first, let's see how we got to this point by reviewing the history of Santa Barbara's general plan.
Few American communities possess the natural beauty, built environment, or civic spirit with which Santa Barbara is graced. These attributes did not happen by chance, but were the results of years of thoughtful and consistent action by local residents. Most notable of these is Pearl Chase, who shaped the architectural development of the city through her wide-ranging influence and tireless advocacy. A pioneer in the fields of conservation, preservation, social services, and civic planning, Pearl Chase was a dominant force in molding the character of Santa Barbara for almost 70 years. In the early 1900s, a group of affluent preservationists founded the Community Arts Association and developed a certain degree of political power over Santa Barbara. Under the guidance of Pearl Chase and Irene and Bernard Hoffman, the association enlarged its scope in 1922 with the creation of the Plans and Planting Committee. The committee initiated a program of beautification and civic improvements that fundamentally reshaped Santa Barbara. The group was instrumental in creating the sense of community identity that exists in Santa Barbara today due to Spanish-style architectural requirements, stringent zoning, and a very restrictive sign ordinance. Their efforts were particularly timely as Santa Barbara struggled to rebuild itself after the 1925 earthquake, which devastated the city. The committee even had a storefront on State Street offering free plans to those willing to rebuild in the Spanish colonial revival style. After the earthquake, the City Council established a Board of Public Safety and Reconstruction, whose main responsibility was to provide a program for rebuilding the community. The engineers on the Board of Public Safety and Reconstruction recommended that no reconstruction should begin without first being considered by architects, the City Planning Commission, and property owners. Thus was born the Architectural Advisory Committee, which helped to expedite the work of the City Building Department, and the newly created Architectural Board of Review. By the 1930s, the city had adopted an ordinance which limited commercial and industrial buildings to 4 stories, or 60 feet high. As the decades passed, Santa Barbara continued to grow and develop. Within months of its formation in 1960, the grassroots Citizens Planning Association called upon the city to adopt general plans as a means of planning for future growth. For over 40 years, the city has maintained a general plan to preserve and enhance the community's assets. The plan establishes policy direction for the long-term development of Santa Barbara. It addresses the many components essential to a well-functioning community, such as land use, traffic, housing, public services and safety, and parks and open space. The 1964 General Plan outlined a rational order of progress through which Santa Barbara could grow and maintain its economical and environmental integrity. The 1964 General Plan comprised 9 elements, 7 of which are mandated by state law. For example, the land use element designates the type, intensity, and general distribution of different land uses, such as housing, commercial, industrial, open space, education, public buildings, public distribution facilities, and other categories of public and private uses. It also identifies goals and implementation strategies for future development with the ultimate goal of living within our resources. In 1974, our community became one of the first in the United States to produce a study of future growth that took into consideration a wide range of complex issues and factors. The impacts of growth study said that growth can be controlled and that restricting housing in one area of the region will just cause a problem somewhere else in the region. The study provided a basis for policy decisions and the realization that changing planning policies could affect growth. This study analyzed the environmental, social, and economic impacts of population growth and land use on Santa Barbara, and provided information for the public and to policymakers guiding future development decisions. In 1982, voters passed a charter amendment directing the city to live within resources by not exceeding existing water, housing, and traffic capacities. This amendment was then followed by an update of the general plan, which culminated in 1989 with the passage of Measure E. Measure E limited non-residential growth to 3 million square feet for the next 20 years. And recognized the need to encourage more housing as a high priority for all sectors of the community. With the current plan's update set for 2010, the city has sponsored community events, presentations, and workshops to gather input from residents on what they want for the future of Santa Barbara. Plan Santa Barbara is designed to gather input from all members of the community. These opinions and information will be used to revise the general plan to suit the needs of Santa Barbara in the 21st century, looking at and putting together policies regarding the many challenges facing the city. The quality of life we all enjoy is a direct result of community involvement. Plan Santa Barbara is the perfect opportunity to help guide your city into the future.
So exactly what do we mean by sustainability, and how does it apply to an update to the City of Santa Barbara's general plan? We'll need to look at 6 elements, starting with land use and growth management. We'll be looking at community character, housing, transportation, the economy, and last but not least, energy and climate change. Often when people talk about sustainability, they are talking about the environment. Issues such as protecting our natural resources and reducing carbon emissions are a critical part of sustainable practices. However, other factors must be addressed as well in order to ensure our community's ongoing vitality. A sustainable Santa Barbara depends on three key elements: a healthy environment, a robust economy, and social equity. Environment, economy, equity. These three E's form the basis of a sound and sustainable future.
Sustainability seems like a fancy word. Is it something that has to do with smart growth? Is it something that has to do with environmentalism? And really, it's a very simple concept. Sustainability is, are you leaving a place as good or better than you found it? Kind of a common sense approach. Are the people coming after me going to have the same kinds of opportunities for comfort and livability that I have had? And a person can ask themselves that question and say yes or no. But it's an important conversation to have because sustainability is definitely part of planning for the city of Santa Barbara.
I think the whole concept of being more conscious about how you live and how you interact in the environment is a very hot issue with everybody, and particularly with businesses. So I'm seeing for the first time, and it's a bottoms-up attitude, right? It's the employees saying, look, it's not good that we're contributing to greenhouse gases. It's not a good thing that we're not recycling. In fact, if you walk into a company now that's not recycling, you'll probably see employees going to the owners and saying, you better recycle, I'm going to leave, right? That's a whole new phenomenon. So, no, I think that sustainable is a tough word to kind of define, especially for business who needs to keep growing, right? They need to find ways to keep expanding their business and yet be more responsible toward the environment.
By listening to the community, the Plan Santa Barbara team has formulated the following definition of Santa Barbara as a sustainable city. Santa Barbara is a diverse community that lives within its resources and protects the natural and built environment for the social and economic benefit of present and future generations. The city has developed goals that can help guide us toward greater sustainability while meeting the needs of the community. We'll present each of these goals throughout this episode, starting with land use and growth management. Santa Barbarans told us that one of the bedrock elements of this general plan update must be the protection and conservation of our neighborhoods. They also said, take it one step further and ensure that we have complete neighborhoods that have within easy walking distance all the services and facilities that one needs for daily living, such as public transit and shopping, community parks and facilities. This is the way to make sure that we have a healthy, livable, and walkable community. Development and redevelopment will continue to emphasize a small-town, pedestrian-oriented scale, and will function within the context of available resources such as water, energy, food, housing, and transportation. Neighborhoods will provide access to daily necessities, including limited commercial activity, transit, community services, and open spaces for gathering and recreation. The city is considering options to limit future development to further restrict the number of new housing units that can be built, and lowering commercial and office growth by 1/3 or more of what was allowed by the previous Measure E.
Sometimes change is feared because it's bungled. And oh my goodness, we did something wrong, and what do we do to make it right? You know, and I think people have seen that in their lives, and they also like to know that City Hall is located there. I can walk on the streets. The El Paseo is going to be there. You know, they like familiarity. They're comfortable with it. And as you get older, I think that becomes more important.
The same people that want to limit the number of units often want to limit the density of units or the height or something like that. And what they're really saying is they don't want things to change. and that's fine as long, to me, you say, okay, I've got mine, and to heck with the other people, and if they have to commute or live several to a house, I'm sorry, but that's what they do. They're choosing to do it. But all these other things are going to have minimal impact. The community does not want to grow at a very fast rate. It may very well decline in population, and it certainly has in some years. And that's, it's democracy. People get what they want, right?
We have to make choices, and we have to acknowledge that change is inevitable, and we have to affect the change rather than simply go through the change. And if we choose, for instance, to keep the density in our downtown at what it is today and minimize new construction, well, change is going to happen. It's going to force things in other ways. It's going to result in, yes, the workers that were in the downtown having to commute in. So we have to understand the consequences of our choice, and that clearly is fundamentally what a general plan update does. It looks forward and it says, here are your choices, and which do you choose? And we have to understand the consequences of things like height limitations, widening streets, all those things as we move forward into the future.
Wherever we go, whoever we talk to, there's one thing we can all agree upon, and that is Santa Barbara has a unique small-town historical character. So what are the characteristics and elements that make up this unique sense of place that is Santa Barbara?
Just to this day, I wake up and I look out and I'm just really amazed at the sense of place that Santa Barbara has, not only on the coast, but the mountains, the coastal areas, the small town feel, the clean air, the pace of things, and the way the town has respected its past.
In my future, well, I'm going to college outside of Santa Barbara. However, I'm coming back as soon as possible because this really is a beautiful place and I love it, and my friends, well, they all want to come back too. It's a great town, great city, great place to raise a family.
Santa Barbara will retain and enhance our historic character, intimate scale, and opportunities for social connection. In downtown, the city may seek to limit heights in selected areas to protect views, historic buildings, and character of surrounding neighborhoods. It may also pay more attention to public rights-of-way and expand public gathering areas such as parks and plazas.
The way I see the South Coast working is that there's low-wage workers who can't afford to commute that all live in a single house. Several of them live in a single house or apartment. Top-end people can afford to live here, and there's no problem. It's that middle management that's commuting. And that commute, until the gas prices started rising, has been getting worse and worse. I've been doing the commute pretty much since 1992 from Ventura, and it's just been getting worse year after year. And in the long run, there needs to be a solution for that.
There's a lot of discussion now about increasing densities along the main transportation corridors. The argument being if you increase the housing densities along the transportation corridors, people are less dependent on automobiles, can use public transportation, and can live near all the services that they need. And it's a good argument, but right now you look on Chapala Street where we're having a little experiment about building a little more dense housing units. Then people are, oh, what are you doing? You're just terrible. But in fact, we won't know until we see these projects done, and I think it's going to be a very good thing. I think people are going to be very happy living in those housing units downtown, and I think they're going to be quite attractive. But it's a change. It's different, and that's why we debate it for so long as a community.
Santa Barbara is committed to providing a wide range of housing options for a socially and economically diverse population, using creative approaches to retaining the workforce and the city's cultural and ethnic diversity. Housing will be strategically placed along or adjacent to transportation corridors for ease of mobility. Beyond the housing programs now underway, the city may provide incentives for constructing apartments and condominiums of smaller size to increase affordability and neighborhood compatibility. Another option may be to lower parking requirements for these type of units to encourage public transit use, walking, and biking. Going further, the city may encourage employer-sponsored housing through innovative design and financing.
The city's overall housing needs are difficult to fully meet when you have a community that is largely built out. On the plus side, Santa Barbara has historically been a renter community, i.e. there's a preponderance of rental housing in the city itself, so that people that are not looking for home ownership, people that are willing to accept renter tenure and are middle income, can generally find rental housing. It's not a plethora of a lot of housing, but there is opportunities that are affordable to the middle income worker. We could use more inventory because that would provide more opportunities. Our vacancy rate is not as good as I would like to see it. To have a healthy community in terms of its rental housing stock, you should have a vacancy rate of around 5%, and Santa Barbara's has historically been around 2%, so it makes it tougher to find. What the community is facing for its workforce that want to be homeowners, and being a homeowner is the American dream, and it's the avenue to wealth for a lot of families. It's the one big asset that they can buy. That dream has been escaping Santa Barbara, I would say, for the last 20 years, and really cranked up in terms of the loss of that dream in the last 10 years, because the price of housing is so far out of the reach of the middle income, even upper middle income worker who really expects homeownership to be an option. We could use support for projects like Cottages Hospital's proposal for the employee housing at the old St. Francis Hospital site. To me, that's a very logical location for additional housing. And employers that want to provide housing opportunities for their employees, and we need doctors, we need nurses, we need a hospital, we need the ability to house them. So you've seen an employer response on the part of institutions that really have no choice. They can't pick up and move their operation to a different community. We need Cottage Hospital here for the community. They, as an employer, have responded with a proposal to create some housing. It won't solve their entire problem, but it'll make a dent in the demand for nurses that we need in the community, doctors that we need in the community. Westmont College has created some employee housing, UCSB. Again, those institutions that don't, and those employers that don't have an option about moving and running their business somewhere else, they've responded, and now the community needs to recognize that those responses are appropriate, and to the extent their proposals meet the California Environmental Quality Act, or we can find the overriding considerations to make those projects happen, we need to support those efforts. Otherwise, our community is going to be without the doctors and the nurses, or they're going to come at a very high price. You can have a preference for people that will be able to walk or use alternative transportation. So you could draw a radius around the project and say, we can have a preference for people that are working within a mile or 2 miles of this particular location. That has been borne out as kind of forward-thinking urban planning, because if you could get to work, not have to get in your car and drive, maybe we can reduce parking. I mean, that's why urban areas like, and not that we're going to be Manhattan, but you can survive in those areas without an automobile. Making that parking expensive is another answer. We did that with our Casa de las Fuentes development for downtown workers. There we saw fit to charge for parking, and that has reduced car ownership. We also have a preference for people that work in the downtown area when they apply, and continuing to work in that downtown area is a requirement of their lease. If they cease to be employed there, they need to move out. Now with home ownership housing, it's a little more difficult, because once you own it, and I would hate to try a test case that you're going to make someone move because they change jobs and they have to sell their house. That's a tougher equation. But going into it and on turnovers, you can build in some of these controls and at least try it.
Santa Barbara will have a more integrated transportation system that connects people, places, goods, and services by providing a choice of transportation modes that promote economic vitality, social equity, and a healthy community. With gas prices soaring, people are more willing than ever to consider alternatives to the one-person, one-car travel mode. More attention and more resources would be provided to improve pedestrian and bicycle networks and increase the level and quality of public transit service.
The city of Santa Barbara was actually built and conceived prior to the invention of the automobile in 1856, and our street system, the grid system, actually is perfectly built for people and bikes, pedestrians, but also really good for the car. So we're in a really good position to plan the future. One of the things that's really challenging about today is that we're facing things we haven't seen before. One of the things we're facing right now is the high cost of oil, and people are really feeling it in their gas tanks every time they fill up. We used to talk about affordable housing, but now we've got another partner, which is affordable transportation. What is it going to look like in a city where gas prices are expensive and people are struggling just to get from point A to point B? For the folks who live in Santa Barbara, that's not going to be as much of a challenge because we don't have to purchase as much gas to get around. But for people who are coming in from more distant places like Ventura and Buellton and the Santa Ynez Valley, it's going to be more challenging for them to afford the cost of getting here to be employed in Santa Barbara.
The City of Santa Barbara has been a great partner with us for many years. Beginning back in the early 1990s, they partnered with us as we developed the nation, or actually North America's largest fleet of battery electric vehicles. Today we run 22 battery electric vehicles up and down State Street along the waterfront. We have our Crosstown shuttle, we've got our Wharf Woody, we've got the Commuter Lot shuttle, and we also have the Seaside shuttle in Carpinteria. So they were very supportive in that phase. They've also worked with us most recently when we've done what we call enhanced transit. We had a need in the community because we had several overloads, and our lines 1 and 2 are now 10-minute frequencies during peak hours, and our line 6 and 11 combination along the State Hollister corridor is 10-minute frequencies as well, and our line 3 is now 20-minute frequencies, which we were pleasantly surprised to see a very huge increase, particularly on the line 3. So across the board, they've been a great partner, and we're seeing great success.
South Coast Santa Barbara clearly has more jobs than it has housing, and it has thousands of people commuting in both from Ventura and from San Ynez Valley and North County, Santa Maria Lompoc area.
The past decade, with the circulation element in place, we have strived to create equality amongst modes: walking, bicycling, transit, carpooling, and we have tried to put those facilities in place to facilitate people doing that. Well, today, with high gas prices, people want to make those choices. They're looking for those alternatives, and quite frankly, we don't have the capacity. Standing room only on a bus from Ventura is not going to cut it. So we have a challenge with Plan Santa Barbara as to what are the commitments we're going to make to ensure that we have employment in Santa Barbara and that we have people to fill the jobs to keep our economy running in Santa Barbara. So it's not just the cost of the house anymore, it's actually the cost of transportation in combination, and it's a big challenge that we need to meet.
A sustainable Santa Barbara means we have a healthy local economy producing quality jobs for all of our residents. It also means that we have, through a combination of land uses and land use policies, an overall balanced city budget. Let's take a closer look at what we mean by a sustainable local economy. Santa Barbara will work to ensure a strong economy with a range of businesses that provide the revenue base necessary for essential services and community enhancements, as well as diverse job opportunities. We will seek to enhance educational opportunities for local residents to meet local economic needs. We will encourage a more green economy and maintain a balanced city budget through sound municipal financing practices. For economic and fiscal health, Santa Barbara may look at ways to further diversify the local economy, encourage small local businesses, a grow-your-own philosophy. Along these lines, the city might consider closer ties with UC Santa Barbara to bolster opportunities for new research and development firms and startup businesses.
California has even more uncertainty, and that's why we believe California probably is in a recession. While we don't think the United States is in a recession, we think California might be, because in addition to all the national issues, we've been hit harder by the housing market than most of the United States. have a higher percentage of homes under foreclosure. Well, usually North County is, and for several years now, has been the economic engine of Santa Barbara County. It has had very high growth. And what's happened recently is that the economy up there has actually been shrinking. They've been very, very hard hit by the housing issues. And the consequence is that for the first time in quite a while, the South Coast is the fastest growing part of the county's economy. And it's not that the South Coast is doing particularly well, it's plugging along at its own 1.5%.
Santa Barbara will preserve our natural resources and effectively manage our public facilities and services. We will reduce our dependence on fossil fuels and promote conservation through energy-efficient design and reduced consumption to mitigate the associated impacts on climate change. Santa Barbara will strive to become a local, regional, and global environmental leader in the areas of energy, water, food, and waste management. To conserve resources and reduce our city's ecological footprint, Santa Barbara may increase requirements for green building and reduce its use of fossil fuels while expanding its use of renewable energy sources such as wind, solar, and ocean wave technology.
The City of Santa Barbara, as an organization, as a government organization, is working very hard to minimize and or reduce our waste stream to the greatest extent possible. The City Office Recycling Group convened three and a half years ago with a representative from each division or each department in the city, and what we did was come up with a strategy for increasing the diversion rate for the city. We were somewhere around 40 or 50% back then, and within a year we had increased the diversion rate for the city organization, the government, up to 70+%. And make it clear to people that our emphasis was on recycling and not on trash. So what we did was take all of the recycling and trash and switch the capacity so that the difference, or the larger capacity, was now recycling, like a 7-gallon recycling can and a 1-gallon container for trash. It made the employees aware that the City of Santa Barbara's emphasis is on diversion. It's not on trash, and it's just clearly represented right there in the capacity of the containers in every workstation in the city.
The wastewater treatment plant is a fairly energy-intensive process. However, we've made a lot of modifications at the plant to reduce our energy demand. We've changed out pumps and motors and really made the process more efficient. And importantly, we've also implemented the use of a fuel cell to use biogas generated at the plant as a hydrogen supply for the fuel cell. And the fuel cell then generates about half of our energy needed at El Estero in a very clean manner.
We've got about 509 vehicles in the fleet. Roughly a third are currently alternative fuel capable, and this year we're purchasing 52 vehicles, and about 2/3 of those are alternative fuel capable. We're looking for opportunities to purchase hybrid vehicles. We're running on B20 biodiesel. We're trying to buy fuel efficient vehicles. We're buying some electric vehicles. We got some compressed natural gas vehicles, and we're just trying to pull out all the stops that we can to try to get more fuel efficient, environmentally friendly vehicles. We have the opportunity to show what can be done. We have the resources to do some of that and to set an example for other agencies as well as private citizens to see that this is what can be done. And this is what helps drive the alternative fuel industry as well. This is what creates a demand for hybrids. This is what creates a demand for vehicles running on ethanol or compressed natural gas.
In a nutshell, we're looking at every opportunity that is in a building. We're looking at lighting systems, we're looking at mechanical, which includes air conditioning systems. We're looking at plug loads, which are controlled by building users. So we're looking at all those opportunities, trying to find the most efficient devices, looking for opportunities to replace old, inefficient equipment, and also working with the building users to try to reduce the amount of plug load they have. We try to discourage using things like personal refrigerators, electric strip heaters. We try to use the most efficient copiers, printers, other office devices. So we're looking at a building holistically. We're trying to get as much efficiency as we possibly can. There's been a lot of opportunities lately for efficient lighting. We've been replacing old lighting systems with new ones and trying to cut down on the amount of lighting where we feel things are overlit, providing task lighting for the building occupants. There's a lot of opportunities and we're exploring them all. We're actually right now 10% below our 1990 baseline, which is really good, which is actually better than the Kyoto Protocol calls out right now for our emissions for all of our buildings and operations for the city. So we're kind of excited about that, but we want to, of course, improve on that. And we're looking at, we're rolling out LEED for existing building right now at 630 Garden Street. So we're going to be recommissioning that building, putting in new HVAC systems, putting in new controls, and we're just excited about the possibilities.
We've taken a closer look at how the principles of sustainability are being applied right now in the city of Santa Barbara. But we need to do more. This would not be Santa Barbara if we did not engage in a vigorous discussion of all the creative possibilities. In segment 2 of our series, Plan Santa Barbara, we will convene a group of Santa Barbarans in a conversation to identify strategies and actions that will help us become a more sustainable city to meet the needs of our current residents and for future generations. Welcome to Plan Santa Barbara. I'm Daniel Isofano. I'll be serving as the moderator for today's program. The city is currently engaged in a comprehensive update to its general plan, the key document that looks at transportation, housing, land use, future growth and development. It sets forth the constitution for how the city will grow and change going into the future. And with me today is a group of local community members who have agreed to engage in a conversation with us about these many issues. And so let's welcome to our discussion today, first of all, Dave Davis, who is the Executive Director of the Community Environmental Council here in Santa Barbara, and also the former Planning Director for the city. So he brings many decades of experience in looking at these important policy issues. And Dave also serves on the Metropolitan Transit District Board of Directors. We also have Joe Ruchon, who is a 34-year resident of Santa Barbara, a neighborhood activist, someone who brings experience from all over the country, New England in fact, where he also was engaged in city administration and urban planning policies. And Joe has a critical eye and a great way of looking at issues to add some excitement to our panel here today. We have Mickey Flax, who also is a longtime resident of the city, helped to found a citizen coalition that was instrumental in developing some of the early policies that led to the famous Living Within Resources Charter Amendment for this city. And she is currently a board member of the county commission dealing with housing and other matters here in this South Coast region. And we have Connie Hanna, who is currently a vice president of the League of Women Voters, a longtime resident and activist as well, and someone who can draw on the years of experience to look at the issues facing this community in a very important way that will guide our discussions and help us to engage the rest of the community. In fact, we'd like to begin our discussion today with Connie, who has thought about this phrase, living within our resources, given that a lot of thought, and would like to maybe give us some of the background, what were the origins of that, and what it means today, and what it might mean for the future of our community as we undertake this general plan update. Connie?
Thank you, Dan. The whole theme of this general plan update is called Living Within Our Resources. And many Santa Barbarans have been worrying about that for over 100 years. This city is a very small geographic area, trapped happily between the mountains and the ocean. It was clear very early on that there were going to be limits on our resources and what we could do here. At this point in time, we are building $1 million and $2 million condominiums and homes that no one who works here can afford to buy. This has created the lengthy commutes to Santa Barbara that everyone opposes. 85% of all the housing now being built is unaffordable to those who want to be housed here. And every $1 million condo built only adds to the demand for services. The city of Santa Barbara is close to build out. We need to establish a city policy that only smaller, affordable units will be built. If the developers cannot build these, and they probably can't, then we don't build anything until public monies are available to add more low and moderate income housing. Since we can't build our way out of this problem, maybe we could think our way out of it.
That's very interesting, Connie. And what you're proposing, I'm wondering, will that necessitate a behavior change or a lifestyle change for people in this community or maybe other residents? And I don't know if others here on the panel would like to chime in.
I thought maybe David would explain how we can do this.
Okay. We need out-of-the-box thinking, so to speak.
Santa Barbara has always been on that cutting edge, and so this is another one of those, if you will, tipping point moments where, in fact, we need to show how to lead. In the past, we have been always constrained, if you will, at least by the impressions of what the city could or could not do under zoning law. And I think over the last 20 years, the community explored very, very much cutting-edge theories that, in fact, from a local standpoint, we could control the amount of growth. We did that through Measure E, through the charter sections. We also both basically got to the point, though, of recognizing that we're a mature city and we're getting to the point of build-out. All properties have reasonable uses on their properties today with reasonable values, so nobody is, if you will, being deprived of their use of land. And as we get closer and closer to that full build-out, the community has the ability, I believe very strongly, to select what they need and not simply take what other people desire to do from a land use standpoint.
But isn't there a basic conflict here? I mean, we're talking about, on the one hand, limited resources, very limited land supply, and then we have these huge increases in housing cost, and yet we're trying to, as Connie said, make it affordable, accessible to the next generation. So those seem to be opposing forces. I don't know how we resolve that.
Frankly, I will tell you that over time, and we have studied it, Mickey and I sat on a project called the Economic Community Project. You could build as many units as you possibly could physically, and in fact the effect upon the price of housing here would be negligible. When you get to Connie's main point there.
And that's because the demand is so virtually unlimited.
The demand is unlimited, and there is a physical limitation as to how many you could build. But if you tried to build your way out of it, essentially, there is marginal effect upon the actual prices because of exactly what you said.
Yeah.
I don't think we should minimize the fact that housing is today our #1 problem. It has been ascertained in a community survey that in an open-ended question as to what is the #1 problem, nearly half the respondents said housing. Now, for an open-ended survey, that's very unusual. And in the past, the answer to that question has usually been growth. So the concern about housing has, in the general public, more or less replaced the concern about growth. What Connie was alluding to, and what I always ask, is housing for whom? The majority of the people who live here are renters. The majority of the people who live here do not live in single-family residences. They live in apartments or in multiple, or at least in duplexes or other kinds of structures. 13% of them are below the poverty level. In the city of Santa Barbara, 11% or so live in subsidized housing, and there is a 5,000 person waiting list for that subsidized housing. Growth has not been a problem in the past decade. In fact, the U.S. Census shows that between 1990 and 2000, the population of the city of Santa Barbara declined by 1.5%, while the population of California and other cities was, of course, growing. So growth isn't our problem. Our problem is distribution of housing.
You mean who gets it? But
who gets it and who lives here? The difference between 1960 and 2000 in household income, you can see from charts developed by the EC Economic Community Project that it studied, shows that the middle class has shrunk and continues to do so, while the rich come to town to live in million-dollar condos, second homes, and so on. We have local workers who are traveling an unconscionable amount of time and distance every day. 3.5 tons each day of carbon dioxide goes into our air, affecting climate, I'm sure, already. What we need is smart growth. That is growth that provides for the people who live here, that conserves natural resources, that encourages compact commercial and mixed-use development, and walkable residential neighborhoods.
now, Mickey, you identified the problem of getting housing to the people who need it most, but again, in our capitalist-based economy, how do we do that without overstepping the role of the public sector? How do we accomplish that? Do you
People
have any
always
ideas?
throw in capitalism at me as if I have the answer to it. Maybe I do. One notion that has been going around, well, let me step back for a second. Low-income housing, there are funds available, and both the City Housing Authority and the County Housing Authority, on whose board I sit, have made good use of whatever federal and state funds are available for low-income housing. What is missing are funds for middle income, people who make in a family even $100,000, $120,000 a year, but cannot possibly afford housing at Santa Barbara prices.
So they're sort of falling through the cracks. We have
or they're
some
traveling.
programs for the very low income, but we don't have it for that income
Right,
strata
and
just above.
the market builds for the very rich. So that strata just above, we might consider, now this is anathema, but we might consider the institution of a transfer tax on the sale of property, a kind of low-rate sales tax that could be levied on simply the profit, that is, the amount that the unit, the house is selling for today, minus what it was purchased for at the last time it was purchased.
Now, on this last point, Joe, I'm just wondering, as a person who has an ear to the ground and understands some of the conversation in the neighborhoods, do you think a concept like what Mickey brings up has some legs to it? Do you think it might gain some support among the communities out there?
Specifically what, the transfer tax?
That idea, yeah, of setting aside a fund that would be used to help generate that next tier of housing that Mickey is referring to.
If you were going to embark upon a thing like she described, it would probably be an equitable way to finance it. After all, most people in this country don't make the kind of windfall capital appreciations that are realized in Santa Barbara when you sell a house. It is a huge windfall, and some of that, I'd say, a considerable amount would be due to some of this, what the city government has done to increase property values. So I don't think it would be at all inequitable to consider tapping some of that that windfall.
So some reasonable number, perhaps.
I think there's an underlying economic issue here, though, that we all have to recognize. That is, over time, because of everything we have done here, making this place as nice as it is, as small as it is, as accessible as it is, it's highly desirable. And the price of land, the price of the land itself is the driving factor now. It's not the price of construction or whatever, it's the price of land. And that's a market force which, again, I think a little later, I want to talk about energy. And I think the market forces that have been the drivers for a lot of what we've seen here on the South Coast, there's some change in the wind coming. I don't know what that's going to mean in terms of long-term affordability, but I think there's some real change that may be coming because the markets are going to be reacting to a future which is really uncertain.
Now, people speak all the time of the unique desirability of Santa Barbara, its location on the ocean. Connie, you referred to that quality right at the outset. And again, turning back to Joe, in the neighborhoods, the concern is about protecting and conserving the neighborhood quality, the small town character and charm that we have here. And as we think about these different issues, the housing crisis, maybe ways to resolve that, how do we protect the community design, the community character, do you think? And is that even something we can get our arms around and put policies in place to make sure is not threatened?
Well, you mentioned community character, and I was thinking about this on the way over here. And thinking about it, it's kind of like what old Potter Stewart said. I have trouble defining it, but I know it when I see it.
Right.
And I think most of the vast majority of the residents of the city know it when they see it. And I think it's the number one priority in their minds to protect and preserve it. Protect it from whom? I'd suggest that sometime we have to protect it from ourselves. Because in our enthusiasm, we often get a little obsessive, and we forget that a city can't be all things to all people, that even a great cities like Santa Barbara have flaws, and some of them are incurable flaws, and yet we're always tempted to make it perfect, even though we know what happens when you try to perfect the unperfectible. Or imperfectible, whatever it is.
What would we say as a panel are some of those unique attributes or desirable qualities? Joe or Connie would like to add in?
Okay, well, I'll finish up on my take on community character. One of the examples of things that we seem obsessed with pursuing, Mickey brings up housing. We've all recited the mantra almost, well, we can't build our way out of the affordable housing crisis, and as soon as we are pleased with ourselves for being so perceptive and saying that, we turn around and we're seduced by plausible sounding plans to do just that, to build our way out. And one of the reasons I want to be involved in this process is to lend a critical eye on any questionable plans that come out of this process that might, if they don't work out, if they come up short, might have some serious impacts on community character. And if that happens, we'll know it when we see it, because we're going to be seeing it for a long time.
Good. Are there any strategies that you or other neighborhood associations have talked about that they would like to see advanced through this general plan process?
One of the things is that when you get to problems, insurmountable problems, problems like housing affordability for the middle class, this is a problem. This isn't just unique to Santa Barbara. Every city has this. I was back in a town I worked in just recently, that I worked in years ago, and headline in the paper, big problem, housing unaffordability, because in the last year, the median price of a house has skyrocketed to $188,000. Yeah, I mean, no matter where you are.
Sounds like a bargain by our standards.
But see, this problem is endemic to any city that is attractive to live on. And I don't think we can cure it. The best we can do is some damage control. And I think there are a lot of good ideas for doing effective damage control. For one, preserving the middle-class housing stock that we have now so it doesn't transfer into something else where we erode our housing base. Because it's just important to save one unit is valuable in the net of building a new housing unit, even though building new housing is much more politically sexy. Preserving them it counts for just as much.
Right, absolutely. So, Connie, did you have some ideas?
Well, yes, I just wanted to add that we've had a pretty clear indication about how people are feeling, because several community organizations went together to put a HIDE initiative on the ballot, hopefully, for November of 2009, not this year. And so we've been out circulating petitions, talking to people all around town, and we find a great deal of support. We only needed 6,500 signatures. We already have 7,500 and another month or so to go. So people are saying that they want the small town ambience that Santa Barbara has always represented. It's just one piece of trying to control development, but hopefully it might keep the downtown area, which we're particularly focusing on the small-scale downtown that it's always been.
So for a lot of the community members, height is a critical factor in shaping their image and perception of the quality of Santa
Actually,
Barbara.
height and setbacks are critical, but we could only put one thing in the petition, and it turned out to be height. But they're very anxious that perhaps the city could put a better ballot measure on in 2009 and control setbacks as well.
Right, good. Dave, did you want to?
Yeah, not to be provocative, but I think this community way too often looks backwards and not forwards. I think we plan essentially for ourselves and not for 2 generations from now. I don't think we have the capability, frankly, of projecting the values of where we need to be in two generations from now. And I think because of that, we will actually be doing a process here that if we don't incorporate the future, we're doing a disservice to our kids and their kids. None of us here, our children will never be able to live here. That's not right.
And you believe, and that's the affordability
It's the affordability issue. And no, you're never going to solve it, but I think you're always going to try to be approach it. I agree with Joe. We need to protect the existing housing we have, because when that's lost, it's going to be replaced with stuff which is even less affordable. We talked about, growth, but in fact, as Mickey said, population's decreasing. Where's the growth? It's less than 1%. It's not rampant growth which is going on. There is change. And change is very difficult, and I think, there are, unfortunately, I would be the first to say, a couple projects on Chapala Street which are in your face in terms of their design, and their gross errors in terms of how high-density development should be done. I would be the first to admit that.
And people have reacted.
Oh, very reactive. Overreacted. Very much overreacted.
It only takes one bad or 2 bad projects, and then you.
But I got to tell you, I work in an office which most people are, very frankly, under 35. Not one of them think those projects on Chapala are bad. In fact, they like them. There is a whole different value system of, if you will, the emerging younger generations to the urban fabric environment and what has grown up, what they have grown up with, which is a vibrant downtown. Now, a little bit later on, when you ask me about energy, I'm going to tell you about a downtown which could die in 10 years. Could be dead. And these issues of building heights and what have you, why were they talking about that back
Well, we'll get to that energy. I know you're chomping to get on that one. But Nikki, I want to come back to you on this housing question.
In terms of building our way out of it, that is what used to be promoted by developers and realtors who said supply and demand. If we just build enough, then the prices will go down. That is absurd.
And
probably absurd,
we all
and
agree.
nobody is proposing that. That doesn't say that it is not possible to find ways, if we want to build for the need. That is, if we have a city, if we have employees of the county, of the university, of the hospital, who live and want to live in the city, the younger people do not want to live in sprawl. They don't want to drive 50 miles. They would prefer to live in the city. We want those workers to be here. We don't want to send them away. If we say that our future in terms of land use and building is to provide, in fact, for the people who have to be here in order to make it a livable and a vibrant city, then we're not building our way out of it. We're simply saying, neither are we going to build to the market. We are going to build to the need.
Let me add one thing. That actually is living within your resources.
Correct.
The way we look at living on the resources now of water and traffic and what have you is great. But in fact, what we're really talking about is a quality of life. And that quality of life balances both the economic, the social, and the environmental consequences. If in fact we're exporting our workers, we're exporting our pollution, we're exporting our resource demands, and simply taking and using those here to support ourselves and the lifestyle that we like, it is criminal. It's just not the way it should be. It should be a holistic community. People living near where they work, walking to where they recreate. We have had 50 years of cheap energy, which has allowed us to sprawl.
Yeah.
That's over.
Well, I think what Mickey seems to be saying is that if we take the resources we have, not necessarily add significantly to those and, quote, build our way out. We're not going to do that, but we reallocate within those resource thresholds, and we target the groups that are most in need and then build for those needs and still stay within our threshold or our limits to growth, essentially. That seems to be the strategy that's emerging here, and we could do that. It may take, again, creative policies or programs.
And Daniel, again, when I mentioned, I didn't actually complete the thought, the fact that we've always been on that edge. It's people like those around the table which, working together, right, we'll solve this problem. There was a time, I must say, where I thought this was insolvable because the market forces were going to overwhelm us. I think that there are going to be some changes in market forces that we're going to be challenged, but new opportunities are going to open up because of that. And I think the kind of brain power and the emotion and passion in this community, right, this general plan process could be really transformative as to what the future could be.
Well, and Joe, do you want to join
My
in?
God, this is, you got to agree with all these nice sounding things that we've been talking about, but the devil is in the detail. You say we can cure this thing or substantially transform it without in-your-face development. How much housing, how much development will we have to have before we reached, you mentioned a tipping point, before we reached a tipping point and getting any, has anybody enumerated the extent of this problem and what we'd have to build? We would have to transform this city to have any appreciable effect on these gigantic problems, and I don't think that's the kind of city anybody would want to see here.
But do you agree, Joe, with this notion of limiting the amount of growth and just saying we're built out and possibly reallocating or shifting within that? Would that be...
The devil's in the detail here.
Okay.
How do you do that reallocating?
Yeah.
But you know, the devil's always in the details.
I understand.
That's why you have a sense of community. And that's why in this community we got to stop talking about what used to be or protect. We have to start talking about what we want and creating plans to get there. And again, to say the devil's in the details, well, you know what? That's where the work has to start.
Let's talk about the
right?
details.
And that's where the work has to start. There's a group up on the Mesa right now that is developing a plan that's sustainable for the Mesa, looking at affordability, walkability, commercial services, and what have you. If I were the czar of planning, like I used to be, I'd be basically saying we ought to build this general plan off the building blocks of the neighborhoods, make them sustainable, develop where, in fact, additional housing could go near where work is. And we got to start thinking outside the box, right? Those commercial areas, La Cumbre Plaza, those ought to be mixed-use nodes of neighborhoods that connect into transit. And Joe, you put forward many times, well, it's never been proven whether, in fact, transit corridors and high-density housing work. We don't have a choice of proving it. We have to make it work, because that's the only future in this community which is going to make sense. Otherwise, very frankly, we will be overwhelmed by high-income housing and services and people who will be willing to pay. There has to be a community consensus that that's not the future we want. And this community back in 1964, when it adopted its general plan, it made a bold statement. It says, we're not going to let market forces determine our future. And for the last 40-some years, that has been the movement of community activism to counteract through public action what normally would be the market forces facing us.
Right, and Connie, you brought up very early on, and we were talking before the broadcast about the years and decades, really, of innovation and creativity.
Absolutely, and that's the reason that Santa Barbara looks different than Orange County or anything south of us. And the people
we can just write off everything to the south from this point
The people who live here are desperately attached to the identity of this city. So I would encourage them all to go to general plan workshops and meetings to do their input into what is really going to be possible to do to control the direction of growth, which we've been working on every time we do a general plan.
Well, I think the issue also is still planning for who? Sometimes there's mythology involved. Like I myself was surprised to read that 54% of the people in this region do not live in single-family homes. That is certainly not what people think.
Right.
It used to be that people didn't realize that the majority of Santa Barbarans were renters, or that the median income of Santa Barbara is not like the television show of bygone days Santa Barbara, but is in fact lower than the state. So there is a kind of myth that exists in people's heads about a Santa Barbara that's small, that's quiet, that doesn't have too much going on, that has all buildings of 1 and 2 stories where everybody owns their own home. This is mythological. We have a growing, in terms of workforce, vibrant, exciting community whose median age is going down as more young people, not in terms of residents, but in terms of workers, because they can't afford to live here. And the median age at some of the workshop plans, and I would venture to say among those who signed the petition, though I'm just making that up, is probably a little high. And what we need at these workshops and in general in community participation is to see and hear the younger people who might not live here but who do work here and who want to live here and who will be the inheritors of this general plan. I'll be gone by the end of this general plan. Connie, I think, will be joining me. And it almost isn't fair for us to be trying to hamstring the future. We should be trying to be open and look at it in terms of the younger people who will be carrying the city.
That's a very good point.
Except we could build more if we could find a way to make it affordable. We are not building affordable, and we've got to, in this general plan, figure out a way. It doesn't matter whether it's rental, which we need badly, or whether it's small apartments or condos. They have got to be affordable for the people who work here. And how that's to be accomplished, I keep waiting for Dave to solve.
Well, I got to tell you, because again, it all goes back to trying to solve the problem. The one thing is, we all know what we don't need, and that is things which exacerbate that situation. And we all agree that, in fact, higher income housing not only basically doesn't provide that, but it also increases the demand for service workers, which only exacerbates. So it's very clear this general plan has to say we're near build out. That type of development does not provide any benefits to this region or community. Therefore, the only things which we will allocate our scarce resources to are those things which do bring community benefit.
And Dave, that's a perfect segue to this concept that's been put forward, which we call the community benefit land usage, and say if there's going to be any increment of new growth whatsoever, then it has to be targeted and it has to be directed at what you said, Mickey and Dave and others on this panel, that has to go to the youth, the young people, those who are most in need of the housing, who don't have other means of acquiring that housing.
And Daniel, frankly, we got to think outside the box. When you think outside the box, you got to get creative, and sometimes that's a little scary, because Joe's going to say, that's not proven. Yes, it's not, but somehow we have to work on it. I remember Don Turner, who was Jerry Brown's housing person, coming down here and talking about second units. And he talked about California during World War II and how we had to open our doors to our neighbors to living together in order to provide for the nation's needs. And very frankly, when you look at this community, how many illegal units are there out there?
Enough to make it livable.
Enough to make it livable. But frankly, we need a community discussion. If we had neighborhoods and transportation systems which didn't then revolve around the parking and the cars and all the things, get rid of the car. If in fact we could move away from that and start talking about second units to not only help existing middle income people make their mortgage payments, but to provide affordable housing, there's a vast resource which is sitting there to be tapped. You don't have to build a thing new. But you have to reuse your community in a different, more efficient way. And you then have to deal with all the other issues which come with it. The needs for more parks, the need for more transit, the need for, all those services. which come with that.
Right.
But that's something which, in fact, if we identify the need that we have to be a balanced community, and I am chomping at the bit to talk that the commute that we're talking about today of people living in Newbury Park or Santa Maria, right? In 5 years or less, that will be history. No one will be able to afford to do that. You probably saw the other day that in the LA Times, those outlying counties of Riverside and San Bernardino, housing prices are falling in the 40 to 50% range because people are looking at the cost of housing plus the cost of commuting. I can't afford to live here anymore when my job's over there.
Right. I wanted to go back to Joe here because while it's true he's asking the critical questions and wanting to get down to details, I would defend that position though and say that it's important in a public policy dialogue, as is the one we're involved in now, that we do remain open to critical perspectives and that we are willing to challenge each other in a proper way, in a way that respects all of the different viewpoints and people who come to the table. But I would think that's how we're going to get a better, more reliable and more solid policy consensus out the other end. So.
Well, you won't get any argument from me about not thinking out of the box, because I certainly think, how can you argue that? But by the same token, the devil is in the detail. If you're going to accomplish what we're talking about accomplishing here, you would have to transform this city in order to make a city like Santa Barbara, probably one of the most desirable places in the world, a place where our kids can easily afford to live here. Come on. There are no cities that are perfect like this. There are no cities that have housing, job balances, the kind of ideals we're talking about. And to accomplish it in a city like Santa Barbara, as I said, that desirability factor of Santa Barbara changes all the rules.
But I don't hear anybody saying that we should build as much as is required. They are only saying that whatever small increment is built, that it would be targeted, or if there is change in land use, that it would be oriented toward those segments of the community most in need. That's what I've heard so far.
Dan's got a good point, because overarching this whole thing will be the issue of water. I'll talk about energy later, but let's just talk water, right? This region has limited water resources physically. It has a state system which we tied into during a panic that we're into right now, just like we are with the high price of fuel, right? We need state water. Well, state water, as you know, from climate change and others, their ability to deliver is going down, right? The regional impact of what water will be here, right, will be the determining factor. And so there isn't this ability to say we're going to grow like the 60s and 70s. We're really talking, very frankly, because Connie and Joe and Mickey, you all know, the incremental growth we're talking about for the next 30 years is very small.
Right. Well,
you're talking, at least from everything that even the staff has put out, if you're talking 1,000 or 2,000 more units over 30 years, history has shown we don't build that many, even under the best conditions, let alone now under these more difficult conditions.
It was surprising in looking at the recent report published by the Planning Department, the Development Trends Report.
Correct.
That despite the fact there was the potential to build more commercial or office square footage, it actually was about 2/3 of what was allowed was built. And in the case of housing, I believe it was a 1% growth rate historically, despite the fact more could have been built through zoning.
And again, if 1% new units were built and we had a population decrease of 1.5%, what is that saying? It's saying we're building for the wrong people.
Correct. And that's been actually at least a theme around the table.
But what you're saying is precisely my point. This is the devilish detail I'm talking about. You're saying we have constraints on how much we can build. We have a narrow little build-out limit. Now, how the hell are you going to accomplish that great goal of making this city affordable for the middle class within the constraints of that amount of development?
Right.
Don't take it to the you would provide for the middle class. you provide for the folks that make this place vibrant.
How many of those?
Right.
How, you got a number?
The ones that are working there now.
You're talking about-
Do I have a number?
Right, add 'em
yes.
up.
There are 12,000 people every day driving up the freeway from Ventura.
How many housing units
Right?
are you going to have to build
And
before
how-
you can assure units for those people?
How many?
Yeah.
None. You could actually house those people in existing structures. None.
Or you could build
This
second
community-
units.
That's what I'm saying. In second units.
If you build, a computer model has been done, a computer study that shows if you build second units, simply on every existing house that could accept it under present rules, except for parking rules. But
And
in
our
terms
rules
of,
are really strict.
well, the parking rules make it impossible. But
Yeah.
except for parking rules, if you just turn in terms of land, how much available land and so on, if you simply built all of those second units, you would house all of the people who need housing.
Okay, well, that's what we need to do in the studies going
Now
forward.
we got some detail.
Absolutely.
That's only one
That's what
way.
Joe was
we take
pushing
take that detail, we balance it to see what the,
Right.
what the
Exactly.
effects
Exactly.
versus the negative impacts.
Right.
And
Play it out.
and we have to make sure that this community will accept what it
results.
looks like.
And you
Yeah.
need to deal with
That's
all,
very
like I
good.
say, you need to deal with the things that come with that. You need a place for those folks to recreate. You need a place for those ways for those people to get around rather than having a car.
Right.
And so, yes, as a community, we have to look at development in the future has to be different than development in the past. And rather than being car dependent, it can't be. It has to be neighborhood dependent.
And let's go to
You know,
that.
argue with me on
No,
that.
no, we're partners on
I got to
that.
see the detail how
Well,
you
think about
intend to
that.
accomplish
Think
this.
about that. What neighborhood dependent means is, again, the reversal of the post-war thinking
Exactly.
in this and other communities, where the notion developed somehow that you lived in one place, you shopped in another, and you worked in a third.
That was the,
Yeah.
that
Right.
was
A
the
neighborhood-oriented development means that you have the stores that you can walk to right in your neighborhood.
Yeah.
But
This
it did-
idea of complete neighborhood.
Right, that as much as possible you can either walk or take alternative transportation to your job.
Okay.
That your car is a remote use that you use to go to LA once in a while.
Okay,
True, I get-
maybe if you really want to go there.
That's
but
right.
We have to get back to
Sure.
one of our key issues that we haven't discussed in depth yet, and now that we're running out of time on this program.
Now, let me-
Dave, you've been wanting to help
I've
us
been wanting to
explain
talk
energy.
about the fact that, you know, looking forward, we have to recognize that there are two big issues which are facing the world, which will affect what we're going to be looking at in the next 30, 20 years. Peak oil, the major oil reserves, fossil fuels, right, within 10 or 15 years will be exhausted. Very frankly, not exhausted, wrong choice of words. They'll be on the decline at the same time that world demand is on the incline steeply. And hence, you're going to see a change in the world, competition for resources, the increasing cost of fuel and energy will change dramatically the way we live. You probably all know petroleum is in our medicines, it's in our fuels, it's in plastic, it's in everything that we do. And as the baseline of our economy is based upon oil, and to make that transformation is a 30 to 40 year process. The dislocations economically which are potential here, we're not even thinking about. We're still looking at like, oh my God, we grew so much in the 90s, we need to cut off building heights because look what's going to happen. I will be the first to predict that 5 years from now, that won't be our issue. Our issue will be the fact that we can't find any workers. Then, in fact, we can't provide the services. In fact, the cost of fuel is so high that we're looking around to basically say, what is the next thing? Well, very frankly, you know, we think we need to move beyond that and have to start to look at a new paradigm, a totally new paradigm. Working through conservation, energy efficiency, and we need to learn how to build renewables within this region. We need to relocalize energy, food, and our local economy over the next 20 years.
And I hear the mantra, fossil-free by 33.
Fossil-free by 33. And that's a nice, if you will, catchy tune to head in that direction. There's going to be competition for water resources at the state level, which will affect how much is available here. We're talking about the fact that food costs, right, are going to be so dramatically affected, we need to turn around and look regionally here as to how we protect the existing ag land we have, how we actually increase the urban ag preserves or areas that we have within this region, and have a whole new local regional distribution of food over that period of time. I think we have to really reverse the transportation hierarchy, the cars at the bottom rather than at the top. And in fact, I'm going to predict that with the fuel changes which will happen within the next 5 to 10 years, we'll be looking at rationing, and we'll be rationing for public safety and national security and food distribution long before the private automobile. And if we here in this community have the ability to build neighborhoods here that won't be negatively affected, we could be the model on how you survive this transformation in energy.
So, Dave, it sounds like you're calling for a complete reordering of our social priorities.
It is a reordering, and it starts on the local, regional basis. We need to be working with Ventura, San Luis Obispo, and Santa Barbara counties to look at these issues of food, shelter, housing, and mobility on a regional basis. And we need to be prepared that we're going to go through a massive transformation in the paradigm, and the issues that we have been struggling with since the impacts of growth are totally different. And in fact, it's almost such a changed paradigm that in fact it's going to take some really creative thinking. And it's really exciting to be here at this point in time, because in Santa Barbara, for all the reasons we talked about, it's a community that can address those issues. And again, I believe it starts on the neighborhood basis.
Excellent. Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. I want to thank our panel members, Connie Hanna and Nikki Flax, Joe Rochon and Dave Davis, for engaging with us today. And we think we've stimulated your desire now to join with us in the upcoming Santa Barbara community workshops. And they will be conducted in the month of July, on July 17th and July 23rd from 6 to 9 p.m. at the Faulkner Gallery at the main Santa Barbara Library. And we'd love to see you join with us, as we will have these panel members and other members of the community, your friends and neighbors, joining us